Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. Howard John, welcome to you. It's great to see you again. I want to welcome everybody to our LGW Frontline conversation. And we've been having these conversations about COVID-19, about people on the front lines, people who are doing things to help people deal with the impact of COVID. And then in the middle of all that, we had what I call righteous unrest around the country, and a big discussion about police and protesters and rights and brutality. So I said, we need to shift our conversations a bit to talk about that. And the first person I thought of was my classmate from LGW from 2015, Howard John Wesley, the senior pastor from Alfred Street Baptist Church. And we are in a mind trust together as well. So we're very proud of that. But Howard John, 5 years ago, we had you with us on a panel talking about police community relations, sort of after Ferguson and a couple other things. And you have a sermon that's been widely shared called When the Verdict Hurts, talking about the acquittal of George Zimmerman and the Trayvon Martin killing. Here we are 5 years later, and it just seems to be worse than ever. I mean, what I'm trying to do today is to amplify your voice, to have you talk to us, to lead us, to share with us your thoughts on where we are. But as a former elected official, we seem to have gone backwards in the last 5 years in terms of this. So just your comments on, how you'd like to start.
Well, first, just to thank you for the opportunity. It has been a overwhelming season of trying to address and bring a voice of hope and peace and unity back to our communities, while at the same time validating and vindicating the anger and the righteous rage that I think America is experiencing right now. Ultimately, I think for its benefit, that I think we have to come to moments like this to really expose where our nation is sick. So COVID-19 has done a lot of exposing the sickness, not just within individuals and healthcare communities, but even more racially within our nation. So I'm grateful to be, part of this panel, part of this discussion with LGW. More like a family to me, especially shout out to class of 2015. I continue to see all these chats, and I know how this goes. Everybody thinks their class is the best, but 2015 knows that all of you all are wrong. Class 2015, enough said, that's all we have to do. So I'm grateful, Doug, to be part of this, to hopefully engage and to listen. I think what America needs to do right now is listen to what is being spoken. It was Dr. King, who all of you know said that riots are the language of the unheard, that this is what happens when people and communities are continuously oppressed and repeatedly oppressed. You started this by saying that we had conversation about this 5 years ago. And what I want people to realize is that this isn't just about George Floyd. This isn't just about Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, although those are, cases that are infuriating in and of themselves. But when you attach them to a racial history that is embedded within our DNA, I want people to understand why African Americans, and thankfully even non-African Americans, are so outraged at what we continue to see. And you reach a point where just enough is enough. And we're not just going to continue to volunteer to die. I mean, we track this back from Emmett Till, and even before that with Strange Fruit, with the lynchings of Black men and women in the Deep South where there was no justice. And you track that up through, 4 little girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and bring that all the way up through the Rodney Kings, through the Tamir Rices, through the Trayvon Martins. I mean, forgive me, but damn, how many times do we have to see Black lives being killed in ways that are blatantly racist and the result of over-aggressive policing without ever seeing these instances in other communities, right? You don't experience this in Asian communities. You don't see this in white communities. This only happens in Black communities. And I'm grateful that it's being exposed. I'm grateful that there are peaceful protests. I'm a little disturbed by some of the violence and the vandalism, but I understand it. And I just hope that America is listening, that we as people in our own circles are listening to the rage that is being vented, that I think will ultimately be for our nation's betterment and good.
So you call it righteous rage and righteous anger. And you mentioned Emmett Till. His mother did something very powerful, very painful, I'm sure, for her, where she said, we're going to have an open casket. I want America to see what they've done to my child. And nowadays with cell phones, with smartphones, we are seeing that more and more and more. I mean, and I think that has really had a much bigger impact in terms of the response that we've seen. That you're able, it's like the Vietnam War. All of a sudden, the pictures were coming home. Now the pictures are coming home of an officer kneeling on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes, the person crying out for his mother, crying out, "I can't breathe." And everyone sees that and says, this is wrong. So I think that's helped galvanize the country. We've seen a lot more, I think, white people in terms of these demonstrations. And the challenge is, 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about another case and saying, what happened? Nothing really changed. What are your thoughts?
Well, one, I'm glad you mentioned that. If you study the history of civil rights, Mamie Till's decision to have an open casket for Emmett Till, and for those who've never seen it, I encourage you to Google it. And even when you go to the museum today, when it reopens, of African American history and culture, there's a portrayal of that. And Dr. King acknowledged that America, particularly white America, being able to see firsthand the violence to an innocent, Black youth was a real turning point in the conscience of America. That when we were able to film water hoses and police dogs on protesters, it shook the moral conscience of America. And right now, with the availability of cell phones, I think we are able to capture, and through the pressures of social media, shake the moral conscience of America. So, fast forward to what happens in New York City, and Amy Cooper being asked to curb her dog, and a Black man, Christian Cooper, filming. And, knowing she's on film, she begins to fiend this, "Oh my God, he's hurting me," knowing that if the police show up and a white woman has said an African-American man has assaulted her, not only is this man's justice in jeopardy, but probably his life. And had it not been for him filming this, what would have happened to Christian Cooper? I think what disturbs me about the Minnesota filming is that this officer, Derek Chauvin, is on camera knowing he's being filmed and has no remorse to move his knee whatsoever, almost as if to suggest, I don't care if you film this. The world can see it and nothing is going to happen. And that's why I'm glad the world and our nation is saying, no, we cannot see this and allow this to pass. So subsequently, a few days later, in one of the protests, officers being filmed with his knee on someone's neck, and the other officer is moving the knee off as if to suggest, hey, we can't do this. We can't be filmed with this. This is not correct policing. So I'm grateful that the world is being exposed to it, because prayerfully, as it did with Emmett Till, it will do now, and that shake our moral conscience to see the horror that unfortunately Black communities have witnessed and been victim to for hundreds of years.
So to talk about Mr. Cooper in New York Central Park, he said he didn't say it this way, but basically every time he goes out to bird watch, he knows that something bad could happen, because he's a Black man in Central Park hiding behind bushes with binoculars, which some could see as a shiny metal object. And that he said he's very aware of that every time he goes out. And I've, on my Zoom calls lately with people, I don't think I've had a call recently where someone hasn't started crying. And it's mothers worried about their children, mothers high school kids who want to go down to the demonstrations down in DC, and yet the parents are afraid to let them because of the violence. And the history of that is something that yes, we're seeing it today, but we need to keep talking about the history of it and how long that's going on, really since the start of this country, since we came here with the English in the 1600s.
So I want to say this, and I never want anyone to live in fear or pain. As a Christian, I don't have a vengeful heart, but I do have a heart that's sensitive and hurts. I understand people worried about their children going to protest and become violent, because we know that can become a volatile situation overnight. But I want especially my non-Black LGW members to understand the anxiety and fear that I, as a Black man, live under every day. And so I'll give you a quick example. After the killing of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, who was out taking a run, and now we see the prosecutors testified on yesterday, was hunted down and executed. My sons and I were working out in the garage, and my youngest son got on his bike and wanted to just ride around the community, and I flipped. Like I freaked out, like, no, you cannot ride your bike in this community away from your father. And there's never been any violence in my community. But the fear of thinking that if my son is out riding his bike, he may be killed. That's not paranoia. That's what happens in situations like this, that the trickle-down effect on Black people is that there's this fear that our children or our own lives are in jeopardy just for exercising our own freedoms that some of our white counterparts take for granted every day. And I just want you to know that's an incessant thing in the back of my mind. I am terrified about raising two Black boys in this world. And someone asks, what do you want your boys to be when they grow up? Let's start with alive. I'll take that, And how many of my white counterparts in America have ever had to fear that their child will be killed because of the color of their skin? That is a difficult reality that's inescapable for Black people. And I just want you all to know that hurts my heart. And I wouldn't want that on any parent. I wouldn't want that on anyone. I'm not asking for this equality where we all are afraid. I'm looking for an equality where we're all living in a society where we're not afraid of being arrested or killed because of the color of our skin. That's what I'm hoping for.
So how are we doing in terms of that police brutality? And as you said, it's not just the police, it's society in general. But Al Sharpton yesterday said, get your knee off our neck. And I thought that was very appropriate. What can we do with some of these police departments where the bad apples are overlooked, they're left to continue what they do, and President Obama had a major police reform initiative that just got trashed with the new administration. But I think we sort of need to get back to that and look at how do we reform these police departments, and what can we do to at least have people feel they're on their side, not to be afraid of them.
Well, let me make 3 qualifying comments, because one of the things that continues to be asked of me is, Pastor, what should we do? Number one, I want to suggest that I'm just an individual. I'm not an expert in public policy, strategic plans, governmental affairs. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not a police officer. I've never served in the armed forces. So I want to acknowledge my own limitations that I can only see from where I stand. And the second part is that we all stand in different places, which means that how we approach this is going to be different. The good news is that we do want to approach it. I think everyone on this call and the majority of people in this land want to see something change. I also understand that that's going to happen in many ways on different strategic platforms, from political to ideological to corporate to financial, both short-term and long-term. So this is a huge question that no one person has an answer to. One of the things I've committed myself to doing in using the platform God has given me at the Alfred Street Baptist Church is a few. Number one, reminding ourselves that 98% of men and women who put on that uniform are good people that are trying to protect our communities, that believe in the equality of all individuals, that serve for justice. And I don't want to demonize police officers. Police officers, military personnel put themselves in harm's way for very little pay and protect our societies. So we want to identify that this is, although it's systemic, it's not universal. It's something that has to be dealt with at a systematic level, but it doesn't require the demonization of all police officers. I think every community, especially individuals who are concerned, need to be involved with their police. Like, I'm grateful to know our police chief, to speak with them, to know, what's happening within the city, to ask questions about proper police techniques for arrest, and to be on the front line of advocating that there's certain techniques of arrest that ought to be illegal because they jeopardize life. A knee on the neck is not proper police technique for the majority of police districts within the United States of America. So highlighting that what Derek Chauvin did is not proper policing. I think at some point we need to discuss this qualified immunity that officers have that grant them basically the immunity from these types of prosecutions and convictions. So when the state attorney from Minnesota says, you know what, we've arrested, but a conviction is not likely, that's problematic for me. That's extremely problematic for me, that this qualified immunity grants him some type of protection. So I would like to see us talk about technique, and I would like to see us challenge. I forgot what state it is yesterday that was voting on removing qualified immunity. And I would like to see that happen in more states so that officers can be charged and convicted for improper technique and use. You have to have a higher standard as a police officer. And we expect that from our officers.
So you talked about no one person is the answers, and yet in times like this, people are looking to leaders for answers. I mean, it's interesting. So people are saying, what, and we've got a few questions along these lines. What can we do? What can you tell us to do? What can the church do to help us through this? And another question was on the infamous photo op of sacrilege, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, comments on that.
So one, I'm not surprised, and I know that we all have different political views, and I'm not here to bash the president, but that was deplorable. That was deplorable, and you know, any community of faith that stands behind that act of tear gassing peaceful protesters for a photo op to hold a Bible in front of a church and doesn't see the pandering to the right evangelical wing that is blatant in that, I have no desire to argue that point. I'll simply let that rest. That act speaks of itself. It's a blasphemous act. But subsequently, using the Bible as a prop is something that doesn't just happen outside the church in this administration. Unfortunately, it happens inside the church all the time, that there are those who hide behind scripture to enable an ideology and a praxis that is clearly antithetical to the teachings of our Christ and our God. So I'm not surprised to see this president do that. I've seen it in the Bible being used to justify slavery. I've seen it in the Bible being used to justify the oppression of women in church. I've seen it in the Bible being used to cast out LGBTQIA within our own communities. So that to me is a challenge that I have as a pastor of making certain that we're not using the word of God, our holy scriptures, as a hammer, but more as band-aids to help those who are hurting, not to further oppress them. One of the roles of the church, though, so let me qualify. Black church has always had a different role in societal transformation in the history of Black people. You will see no progressive movement for equality and justice in Black history that's detached from the Black church. So when you see these marches in civil rights, you need to rewind a few hours, because all those marches started with prayer meetings in the local church. It started with singing of hymns. It was a grasping of faith to allow them to be peaceful and productive as they moved into the world. The Black church has a few challenges. One, to create a safe space for the anger and the rage to be vented safely in the presence of God, and know that it's all right to be mad as hell. As a matter of fact, that's the title of my sermon this upcoming week. If you log on Saturday, tomorrow, or Sunday, my sermon's called I'm Mad as Hell. It's a space for us to release that. It's a space to reconnect in a faith and belief that no matter how evil the world is, and no matter how much injustice, we do serve a God who is greater. And that is not simply to pray and leave it in God's hands, because Howard Thurman once said that the power of prayers is directly connected to your being part of the answer. So in the church, it is a trust and pray, but then realize that the prayer is not where we end, the prayer is where we begin. It's a call to action, a call to peaceful protests, a call to controversial conversations with those who deal in racist ideological language. It is a call to make certain that we are voting. That is a huge press within the Black church. And I say to all those who are protesting, if you're not registered to vote, you need to go home and sit down, because all you're doing is making a lot of noise. But if we're going to change our land, it starts with changing our district attorneys, our state's attorneys, and those are elected positions. That's where justice fails, because those are the individuals who make the decision on who gets pleas, who gets exonerated, who gets charged. And if you've got a district attorney, if you've got a state's attorney that is not pressing, we need to change that. You need to vote so that you can be part of the jury pool. One of the things I press upon this young generation, especially of African Americans, is that if you're not voting, you're not part of the jury pool. And you want to know why there are no convictions? Because we're not in the jury pool. So we've got to vote for several reasons: to change those who are in office, to make certain that we're part of the legal process, and to honor the sacrifice of our foremothers and our forefathers who literally, and I mean literally, shed their blood and gave their lives so that we could vote. So when I hear celebrities like Sean Combs and Naomi Campbell using their platforms to talk about withholding the vote because we need to get promises from Democrats and we shouldn't be anti-Trump. Damn that. And forgive me for saying it like that. Damn that. How dare you sit at home and not cast your vote? How dare you not go to the polls? If you're a person of color and you're not voting in this land, shame on you. Shame on you for sitting back and being angry about George Floyd, but not doing anything to change it in these primary and general elections. Sorry, Doug, I get a little passionate about that. I'm gonna cool off and take a little drink of coffee while we shift a little bit. Sorry.
As a former elected official, I'm all about voting. It just, if you want to make change, real change, you got to vote. You got to show up. You got to vote. You got to be there and make your voice heard. So thank you for that. Your mention of the history of the Black churches. And I went on a civil rights tour of the South with some LGW members, with some Washington Regional Association grantmaker members. And in many ways, it was a very depressing trip because you would go from site to site to site saying, okay, well, here's where Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Here's where this person was killed. Here's where the 4 little girls were killed. It was basically seeing a bunch of murder scenes. But on the other hand, there was a lot of hope because it was also a tour of Black churches in the South, from Mississippi through Alabama. And this is where the protest started. This is where the meetings were held. This is where the organizing was, in this very room. And this would led to the March in Selma and a lot of other things. So, in talking about hope, there's an awful lot out there that I think hopefully we will turn to as we move forward over the next few weeks, months, years, to help make these changes possible.
Yeah. It's interesting. Historically in our nation, you have to ask the question, why were churches bombed, right? Why? As a matter of fact, in the history of civil rights, more churches were bombed and burned than any other building, any other private homes. They didn't go to people's homes to burn them. I mean, of course, King had threats, Medgar Evers had threats, but the churches were bombed for a reason. Because those who were antithetical to the cause of justice and racial equality understood what happens with the people who gather in this sacred space and believe that God is on their side. They will not be turned around, and they're willing to die for that. And there was this fallacious thought that if we destroy the church and the building, that somehow the movement would stop, not realizing the church has never been the building. So even in this pandemic, I'm grateful that as our building is closed, our church is still alive and active. There's never been the building. We received, as you all probably know, a bomb threat about 2 years ago here at Alfred Street Baptist Church because of my open stance against this president and against the administration and a threat on my life directly. And I can't tell you what that does, to you in terms of, okay, are we doing the right thing? And then you realize this is the tradition of the church. If we're not being threatened, if we become asocial, apolitical, meaning that we're just this place where, praise God, sing hymns, give God glory, but we're not engaged in political change, then we're not aligned with the history of the Black church. That this is exactly what we're supposed to do. And I oftentimes remind my members, as I share to those who may be of a Christian, background on this call, that Jesus may have died for our sins, but he was killed for something else. That Christ was not crucified because he preached love your neighbor. Christ is not crucified for saying turn the other cheek. Christ was crucified for challenging political systems of oppression and financial systems of oppression against the people he came to love. And any church, any body of faith who's not challenging those same systems of oppression are not truly walking in the footsteps of our Savior. So that's for me and my faith. I don't press that belief on everyone else, but for our faith and our belief in our church, we have to believe that politics and theology go hand in hand. And when you divorce them, then you have really distorted what the heart of faith is all about and what the church exists for, to be a beacon of light in the midst of darkness, a beacon of light and love in these dark times.
And something we've seen this time, which really for me is extraordinary, is when, that photo op was done in front of St. John's Church, the Episcopal bishop for Washington immediately stepped forward and said, "This is outrageous. This is not acceptable. This is blasphemy. This is a sacrilege."
He's the national bishop of the Episcopal Church overall. Michael Curry, brother, black man, came out against it immediately. Yeah.
And when he went to Pope John Paul II's, or St. John Paul II's visitor center, the Archbishop of Washington immediately said, "This is not appropriate." And you don't see, you talk about the black churches stepping forward, but we're seeing these, I don't call them white churches, but mainstream churches, mainline churches, step forward, and their leaders saying, "This is not right. This is not correct." And I think that's very heartening.
Yeah. So one of the things people, when you ask me what can be done, regardless of what side of a political issue you stand on, whether red, blue, Democrat, independent, Republican, this is not the time to be drawing lines in the sand in our community. This is a call for unity, a call for realization that America can be and must be better. But in order to live up to that, we must embrace the value of all life, that we must see within everyone the image of God, that everyone is created in a way that demands we respect the value of their life. And drawing these lines in the sand divisively over any political issue or party, I think is much more detrimental even than the photo op and the blasphemy. I can get over that. What I can't forgive are these calls that basically say, as long as I've got 51%, I'm fine. The hell with the rest of you 49. And I want to challenge all of us to be more unity-minded, that the greatness of this country does not lie in its past. It lies in the possibility of our future, in being inclusive and welcoming. And we've seen that that's the right side of history to stand on. We know that divisiveness and lines in the sand and devaluing life historically has been proven to be the wrong side to stand on. And I pray that all of us will engage in communication, conversation, and use of our influence. LGW, if you got into LGW, that means you got a platform somewhere. You're an influence, you're a regional maker. You help us shape this region. And even if that's simple conversation, even if that's advocacy for unity, if that's policy and process within your own organization, that it's a call for unity and not dismissing anyone based upon color, gender, sexual identity. None of that is a reason. We are our best when we're together.
Let me ask you about Black Lives Matter. And we've got a question from someone saying they're fearful and they get a lot of pushback when they say they support that. They support Black Lives Matter because the immediate pushback is, well, don't all lives matter? Why are you just singling them out? They're looking for some guidance in how do they respond to that. The way I see it is when some people hear Black Lives Matter, if they hear only Black Lives Matter. And instead of hearing Black Lives Matter because they're the ones under attack, they're the ones who have knees on their neck and have had that for centuries here in this country.
So, I get that. And I think the key is what you just said. It's mishearing what is being said. No one's saying only Black Lives Matter. That's never been a tenet of that. But until you are in a place where your color is a threat against your life, I don't think you can understand the passion of which Black Lives Matters emanates from our hearts. Again, until you see this over-aggressive policing and brutality and death. So forgive me, Doug, I'm about to say some stuff that's politically incorrect, and I just pray that this is a safe space in LGW to make this statement among people. But why do you never see a white man being killed by a cop? Why have we never seen a knee on a white man's neck? Why can a white man be carrying a gun, cursing at a police officer, and be peacefully arrested? Why is Dylan Roof peacefully arrested after killing 9 people? And Breonna Taylor is shot dead in her apartment by cops who were serving a non-knock warrant and just fired open and she shot 20 times. Damn, that never happens in white communities. It never happens. So if you're offended by Black Lives Matter, I don't give a damn, because this isn't happening to you. This isn't part of your reality. And until it does, I'm going to continue to advocate that my life matters, because you're treating me as if it doesn't. The system treats me as if it doesn't, right? The police treat me as if it doesn't. So this isn't that Black lives only matter. It's that we have to remind a system that says that we don't, that we do. So give me an example, man. The McMichaels kill Ahmaud Arbery. The police have video of it for 8 weeks, and there's no arrest. We hear him saying, "We just killed this," and uses the N-word, and there's no arrest. Black man kills a dog and goes to jail immediately for years. So the life of a dog is more valued than the life of a Black man. And listen, I'm an animal lover. I'm not saying kill dogs. What I'm saying is, damn, can my life matter in America as much as an animal? Do I not bring as much to society? Do I not contribute as much? Do I not have as much right to live as your animal does? But we can be killed with no justice and no arrest. So until that is your experience, Black Lives Matter. And I'm not saying that yours doesn't, but mine does, and someone's got to hear me say that. So if you're afraid of using that, I don't know what to tell you. Then be afraid, because it's not going to change it. Black Lives Matter was not searching for white allies. And I know you all don't want to hear that. Here's the truth. Black Lives Matter was an internal movement within Black people that didn't care whether we had alliances or supporters or not. And so now the fact that it's national and there's this pushback, that still doesn't change what the movement was, which is to recognize that there's a system of racism that declares Black life is invaluable in America, and we are objectified and can be killed without justice. So yes, Black lives matter. Your life matters. Her life matters. Gay lives matter. Women's lives matter. I'm not saying it isn't. So for me to be pro-Black doesn't mean I'm anti-anything.
So did we just hear some of your Mad as Hell sermon for this weekend, or?
Well, you probably heard some of the passion about it. Listen, if you're sensitive, you don't want to watch this weekend. Like this ain't Martin Luther King, it's Malcolm X this weekend. I'm just letting you know flat out. We need to air this, because if you don't vent the rage and bring it to the Lord, it becomes destructive in the community. So this is let's come together, let's talk about why we're angry and what God calls us to do in that anger, as opposed to being destructive.
And I think we're seeing that across the country, where this, as you said, righteous rage has played out some. And now people are stepping back and doing much more, the peaceful protests are much getting all of the attention now, as they should.
Yeah, I think with the conviction of the other 3 officers, there was a lessening of the violent tendency, a more focus on the justice that we seek and the peaceful protests. I don't think history has shown us that hyper militarization of communities only makes things worse. So I think we had to get some distance from this president's flexing and threatening the use of the 1807 Insurrection Act to hyper militarize our communities. That is not going to solve this. You're only going to further enrage these communities. We've also seen instances of police protesting peacefully, to say to protesters, I'm here with you. I'm here to protect you. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to protect you. And we need more and more of those images. And I wish, as much as I'm not a Fox proponent, I wish CNN would do more, as well as NBC, of showing the peaceful side of these protests, as opposed to just the violence and vandalism, where people are just taking a knee, where they're just laying out flat, where they're just peacefully, saying no justice, no peace, that we have vaulted the violent piece and not pressed the peaceful as much. And there are a lot of peaceful protests, and hopefully over the next few days, we'll see that change even more and more. There'll be less vandalism, less looting, less hostile interaction between protesters and police, and just more of America listening to voices of people who are fed up. And I'm grateful that it's no longer just Black people. Let me say this. When you look out and you see young people and you see Caucasian and Asian and Latina, that says something, that this is not just a Black movement. This is an American movement. And allow me just to be who I am and say, praise God for that. That this isn't just Black people out marching. This isn't Ferguson, right? This isn't Ferguson. This is a national movement. And again, I hope America's listening.
If I could correct you very slightly, you said when the other three officers were convicted.
I mean, charged.
And they're charged.
Right.
And conviction is a long way to go.
Long way. And
it's a concern that we might see another George Martin incident. We might see whatever, because of this limited immunity or whatever. That's very tough to get a conviction on police officers.
It's tough to convict police officers. Again, that qualified immunity is something politically that I would love to see us challenge. But my fear, Doug, in all honesty, is a charge without a conviction is going to lead to this all over again.
Yeah, I think it would be worse. I think it would be worse. The reaction from the country would be worse than what we've seen. Have you been surprised about the sort of international reaction, the protests in London and Dublin and Berlin and sort of across the world? I find that kind of fascinating. People marching in solidarity with George Floyd and the American protests here.
Yeah. I wish they could vote for our president. I'm just, all right, I'm sorry, I digress. To a certain degree I am, because international boundaries have very rarely been crossed for human rights or civil rights issues, very, very rarely. Malcolm X, in his approach to civil rights, argued in the latter years of his life that the reason civil rights was failing was that we didn't bring it to an international stage and make it a human rights violation, that human rights will garner more international support. So that's a piece of it. I also believe in what Hans Kuhn, the sociologist, once said, that the world is imploding as opposed to exploding. We are drawing into ourselves more and more. So when the question is asked, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? A lot now. Everything affects the price of tea in China because we're imploding on ourselves. And social media has exponentially hastened that implosion so that the world is connected more and people are offended by what they see in America and have the right, to say in London, this is wrong. And unfortunately, the arrogance of American society will ignore that we have international partners who are protesting. Right now, one of the things that I lament about American society is this vaulting of ourselves above all nations and all people. We're the red, white, and blue. COVID can't happen to us because we're Americans, that somehow we're better. And I think that one of the things I hope is being heard is that we are a global community now. And protesting in London should have some impact on policymakers here to recognize if we're going to live at peace with the world, we have to listen to this. We have to be concerned about human rights across the entire globe, as opposed to simply, our borders and our boundaries. And there are very few politicians who want to look beyond American boundaries and borders to create a more global, peaceful community.
So we've got a question from the audience that asks, can you say something about how privilege and microaggressions are just as detrimental as overt acts of systemic racism, and how the smaller acts need to be eradicated as well?
So yes, there's a book out. I have it on my shelf over here, Doug. I think it's called White Privilege and the Fragility of White Privilege. And it talks about
White Fragility. It's called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. Yeah.
Yeah. And these acts, these microaggressive acts, the challenge with those is that they're one-on-one and they require a courage in an individual sense that is oftentimes missing in a communal. So it's easier to be courageous in a protest with 1,000 people. But do you have the courage to call out white privilege and aggression when it's a one-on-one conversation? And that to me is where the heart of change happens, when we're having controversial and sometimes dangerous conversations. So let me give you an example, Doug. I get off the plane a few months ago. I'm on Delta. And when I come out, there's a white lady who is, just and with vulgarity and threatening, yelling at this black woman who works for Delta. And travel is tense. So I don't know what has preceded it. I just know it's way loud, and she's getting louder and aggressive. The black woman who works for Delta is simply trying to, tell her there's nothing else I can do to help you. I need to send you to someone else. I'm threatening you, and et cetera, et cetera. So I stepped over and said, ma'am, I don't know what has happened, but I'm going to ask you to take your tone down and to speak to this woman with respect. And the white woman looked at me like, how dare you? I'm calling the police on you too. Well, you can, and I'm going to stand here. But what you're not going to do is talk to this black woman like this in my presence. And calling out that privilege that suggests that I can say whatever I want. And Doug, I didn't want to say this, but to me, Mattis was right. We are seeing the consequence of 3 years of a policy that to me has emboldened white privilege, such that there are those who feel that they can speak, say whatever they want, and treat people of color anyway, because we now have this administration that hail white power almost. And this is not an administration that endorses unity or calm or respect of all people. This is one that literally says white is right and might. And so there's been an emboldening of white privilege under this administration that needs to be checked on one-on-one conversations. And I challenge all of you who walk in white privilege to be aware of it, to understand that you just can't say certain things to certain people and treat people a certain way, that there's certain privileges that aren't just inherently yours because of color or gender, but we respect all human and challenge these acts, these microaggressive acts, with courageous conversation. Now, that woman may never have been changed. She may go back and do whatever she did, but she's going to remember that interaction with me. She's going to remember that I had the courage to say to her, you're not going to talk to a black woman like that in my presence.
So that leads us to another sort of bigger picture question from the audience is, what's it going to take to prevent these egregious incidences from happening in the future? And that a lot of this stuff, I'm sorry to say, starts at home. That these thoughts, these behaviors start at home. They devolve into really heinous acts. And as you said, the message from our top leader is one of division. So it's more than just a one-on-one conversation. How do we really get to the heart of that?
So getting into people's hearts is probably the greatest mystery of life.
Yes.
So I don't know if we always can. What I think we as a society have to do is show what is unacceptable, what we will not deal with. So officers like this must be charged and convicted. It sends a message, right? That you can't do this and feel that you'll get away. We have to deal with this qualified immunity. When we see people like Amy Cooper do what she does, she has to lose her job. The world has to see there are consequences for this. I want something like that to be deemed in the category of a hate crime. You intentionally brought in race to try to threaten this black man's life. That's a hate crime. What these officers did is a hate crime. What the McMichaels did is a hate crime. And I hate that Georgia has no hate crime law in its books. That has to change so that we can punish this at a rate that actually sends a message to those that even if we can't get in your heart, you'll understand that there are consequences. So when you go on Facebook and you see all these posts of young white teens with their neck on other white teens laughing, there have to be consequences for that, right? Your school you have to pay a consequence for that. That has to haunt you. You have to pay for that and realize that is unacceptable behavior. And even though we won't get into your heart, we can limit your benefit from that. You can't continue to gain when you want to act in that manner. So if I can't change your heart, I want to change the law so that there are consequences. And that's part of the movement I'm in, called clergy calling for consequence. That we just want consequence for this type of behavior. That you can't, this isn't just about free speech. Even free speech has limitations. I can't run into a building and holler fire, right? When my free speech puts your life in jeopardy, that's not free. And there has to be a price that's paid.
So Faye Coleman's got a question of, do you think it's the role of black folks to educate white people about how their microaggressions affect them? Who's to hold them accountable?
Yeah, I don't like the word teach. I want conversation of valuing mutual humanity, of letting you be aware of how I feel as a black person in America. And prayerfully, that's enough to change and to move your heart, to be aware. I think we put these walls up around race so quickly and don't have intimate conversations and honest conversations. And that's where the change really begins. And I'm grateful for, and I don't use this term derogatory, but I'm grateful for my white colleagues who want to know, who want to understand, who want to create atmospheres where that type of aggressive behavior is not allowed, is not accepted. So I think just listening to both sides. I want to know how you feel as a white woman in America. I want to know why my presence as a black man threatens you. I like to know why you grab your purse and put it on the other side of you when I get in an elevator. Do I threaten you that much, and why? Help me understand. And sometimes I feel bad that when I'm in a setting of like all white women or elderly white men, I try to contain and control myself differently to act even more respectable, because I feel like maybe I have a role in helping them not be afraid or threatened of a black man, to realize that they're civil black men who are not criminal, because the media has criminalized black maleness. And man, that's a weight to carry, to think that in any white room I walk in, I'm carrying the stereotype of black man and got to change it with my behavior. That's hard. But I'd love to have more conversation to understand and help you see that blackness is not a threat to your whiteness nor your life.
We've got a question from Michelle Cole, basically asking what advice you have for LGW to promote and advance anti-racism in today's society in a meaningful way.
Well, so I think it's going to start again with any member of LGW got in because you have influence. I mean, this isn't some elite fraternity or sorority, but it is a gathering of those who have the ability to help shape our region. And I would encourage you to use your platform, your influence, your sphere, in your job, in your business, to make certain that you're an advocate, that when you see white privilege, when you see microaggressions, when you see systematic racism, that you say something. Martin Luther King once said that we will not remember the voice of our enemy, we will remember the silence of our friends. And to have the courage to speak up and to identify where race is systemic and injustice is prevailing in your influence, in your sphere, is where it begins. Collectively, we form a community in LGW. And I always believe that communities, whether that be church, whether that be business, whether that be something like LGW, has an opportunity to make statements against what we've seen. So I'd love to see LGW come out with a statement against systemic racism, against what happened with George Floyd, advocating peaceful protests so that LGW can speak on behalf of the thousands of us that are members and make a statement about where we stand on certain issues, to make certain that you are aware of what's happening in these elections. I want my members not only to vote, but to vote beyond a single issue. It's very, very important that we not be a singular issue election this time, that it not just be a stance on pro-life that wages how and where you vote, and to be aware of organizations that are funding political platforms that you're not supportive of, and to use your influence on your social media. If people can use social media to spread hate, then surely we can use it to spread unity. And I challenge us all to use the influence in our hands in every opportunity we have to raise our voice. Everyone doesn't stand before 10,000 members and preach, but you've got 2 kids at home that you can talk to. You have a coworker who probably needs to be more sensitive. You have an opportunity to use your platform to stand against certain behavior within our society. So I encourage us to use our individual influence and then collectively as a community to make a stand against certain things.
Oh, John, I want to thank you very much for this conversation. Very insightful, giving us a lot to think about, a lot to discuss. Our conversation is going to continue. I have one last question for you, and then I'll turn it over to you for a final word. And the question is, and I usually start with this question, but I'll end with it. So you stepped back a while ago to recharge, and you came back a little bit early. But how are you recharging? How are you practicing self-care? How are you doing personally right now? How are your kids doing as we go through this?
Well, thanks, Doug. I mean, personally, I'm fine. I think the sabbatical, I believe in providential planning. I believe in a God that orders my steps. And the 3 months off were necessary because obviously jumped right back into COVID and now these racial protests. And to have come to this moment without that time of rest would have left me as an impotent voice. I wouldn't have had anything within me. I would have been drained. So I'm grateful to have a God and a congregation that supported the time off. I've come back off sabbatical with a deeper commitment to boundaries and borders and self-care because at some point you have to shut it off. So although I'm grateful to stand in the prophetic tradition of Black preachers, both female and male, there are times I just got to turn the news off. Times I just have to go take a walk. The time I'm working out again, I'm running, I'm more diligent with my diet. I love spending time with my sons every day. And that's therapeutic and cathartic to me to have that interaction and to talk with them about the world's events. So I'm in a good season right now. You know, our church is shut down. I don't anticipate us opening for quite some time just because we want to be mindful of the continual threat of COVID-19. Hey, everybody, COVID-19 is still real. People are still dying from this. We're still spreading it. So let's be mindful of that. But otherwise, doing pretty well, Doug. And I'm grateful that I'm surrounded by people who want me to do well. And, you know, I have so many friends within LGW, within my class, you know, who I talk to on a regular basis. Shout out to Kira, shout out to Terry. I saw that they logged on. Those are some of my closest friends. So this community has also been helpful for me for the friendships that I have.
That's Kira Jarrett and Terry Copeland.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think Erica's on
too. 2015. So. Yeah.
Erica Darnell, all my class 15. Enough said.
Howard John, any final words for us?
So I think it's the same thing I would say to any member I'm speaking to. And that's that regardless of what faith you have or don't have, whatever religion or not, that even if I don't believe in the same way of God that you do, I believe in you. And I think that the way we change this world is have an a priori belief in the goodness of humanity, in the possibility of change of a society, in the belief that America can and will be a better place, that we have an obligation to make certain that our children and our children's children inherit a world that is inherently more peaceful and just than the one that we left. And so I believe in everyone on this line and the within your heart, regardless of your politic, I believe within your heart, you want America to be more just. I'm going to treat you that way. I'm going to ask you to treat me that way. I'm going to ask you to give me the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to practice the truest expression of faith, which is my love for you, and ask you to love me. And let's believe that through that love, through that vision, and through our courageous conversations, we're going to make this world better. I refuse to give in to the darkness of this moment because there's an eternal hope that shines within me. And I pray that if I infect you with anything, it's a vision and a belief that our society and we as a people can and will be better.
Howard John, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinary conversation. Really appreciate your time, your energy, your effort, everything you're doing in our region to help us through. And folks, stay tuned. We've got a conversation with Monday, conversation on the Tuesday. We've got tomorrow Copeland as well. Conversation. So stay tuned for these to the LGW. Howard John, thank you so much. Everybody have a great day. Have a blessed day.
Thank you all.